Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Feed Your Soul brought to you by Aish. Before we get started today, I would just be remiss if I didn't discuss the tragedy in Meron and how it has affected the Jewish people and really the world at large. It's made headlines all over the world. If you don't know what I'm referring to, at the burial site of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, a big rabbinic scholar and Kabbalist, there was a terrible, terrible tragedy in Israel last Thursday night. This was the yahrzeit, the anniversary of the death of the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and 45 people were killed in a stampede, in a crush of people, in a crushing, like a domino effect of a trip and a fall, and then like a crushing domino effect of people actually being crushed alive. It has been rocked the Jewish world. It's been such an intense, challenging time. If you're watching this, please tell me where you're watching from. If you knew about this news, how you're feeling, how you're doing. Certainly for the Orthodox Jewish world, it seems that everyone is either knows someone directly affected, and or is once removed knows someone who is directly affected by this tragedy. So it's been a super intense week. A lot of people have, spoken about how do we react to pain like this and how do we turn pain into purpose. So I have personally spoken about on my social channels how I have decided to take on something special and different in my life to make sure that I have changed in the face of such a tragedy. And this is the largest tragedy in peacetime tragedy in the history of Israel. And so what I've personally taken upon myself is to do more formal prayer, right? So we know that there are three prayers: morning, afternoon, and evening, Shachris, Mincha, and Mariv. And so I've decided to take on a more formal prayer in my life. As a mother, I learned how to pray and scream out to God, just, informally all the time, all day, every day. But this is something that I have decided to take on. And I would love to hear how you've been reacting to this tragedy, or what you've been doing to deal with the heartbreak, just like Rachel's saying, just total and complete heartbreak. Feed Your Soul is a program that's brought to you by Aish. This is where we speak about food, Jewish food, comfort food, and I can't think of anything more comforting now than cooking some. We're going to actually be baking Mandel bread this week. I'm going to introduce my guest in a moment. And so just something that reminds us of our home, our mothers, our grandmothers, certainly the old country. And that's something I hope will bring us some level of comfort. We'll also be discussing soulful experiences, spirituality related to food. We'll speak to our guest about his connection to food and how it inspires him. So I'm going to introduce this week's guest, but please, as a reminder, let me know where you're watching from, how you're doing, how you're feeling. Hi, Vivek, how are you? From Oman, I see that. Unbelievable. Thank you for being here. Hi there in Istanbul. I feel like you're here every week with us. It's so wonderful to see everyone. Hi in London. How are you? It's wonderful for us to all come together from around the world for this episode. Hey, Frankie in Chicago, what's up? Hey there in Arkansas, Mary. How are you today? I love connecting with each of you. And hi there in Greece. It's wonderful. I'm coming to you this week from Jerusalem. I'm on the road. Hey, New York. It looks like Rita. Nice to meet you. My mommy's here. That's when we know we can start. My mommy's in Philly. Fran, I think in Moscow. Unbelievable. So now that my mom is here, I can introduce Chef Tony. I do want to say, Terry, thank you for saying that. This episode of Feed Your Soul, brought to you by Aish, will be dedicated in memory of the 45 angels who perished in this terrible tragedy. So I just couldn't go. I'd be remiss if I didn't speak about them. So here we go. Co-founder Chef Tony Rosenfeld oversees all things milling and baking at One Mighty Mill. The Boston-born company's mission is to bring back the original superfood, organic wheat, through freshly stone-milled bagels, pretzels, and tortillas. I'd love to welcome Chef Tony to Feed Your Soul. We're so excited to have him here. Chef Tony!
It's great.
How you doing?
It's great to be here with you. Thank you so much for having me. Really sad news as you just passed along. Food, doesn't solve all things, but obviously on sad days, it's nice to have comforts. For me, this is like one of my comfort foods that we're going to work on today. So maybe a little bit of light in a sad day.
Absolutely. Chef Tony, this is your mother's recipe, right? So just talk a little bit about
It
where the
is.
recipe is from.
It's like any family recipe. I think there's some internal arguments exactly on who started the recipe. So I learned it from my mom, and my mom and I discussed last night how much her mother, my Nana, also participated in this recipe. My Nana, God rest her soul, is not with us today, so I think she would have some strong ideas. But long and short, it's an old family recipe. When I was growing up, there was always a tin of Mandel bread in our cupboard. And the beautiful thing about this recipe is it's one of those things that you can make and it will keep for a couple of weeks. And it's just great snacking, great for a cup of coffee or tea, or late night like me when you get hungry and you want to eat something that kind of, hits the spot.
I feel like chefs always eat like super late at night, like after service, like that's when they start eating. I'm also just leave eating any time of day. And so I love that you spoke about the mandel bread, how it stays for so long. Can you just tell me before we get started, where's your family from?
Well, so we are all over the place, like a lot of families. I was born in Montreal, and both sides of my family were a group of Montreal Jews that got all these wonderful food traditions. And if you trace back a generation earlier, Lithuania, Hungary, and those were the two primary spots that we came from. So a lot of our food traditions in our family are Ashkenazi, and I'm grateful for that.
Me too. I happen to love Sephardi food too, but this one also, Ashkenazi. My parents are from Transylvania, so also Hungarian, Romanian. So I'd love seeing this recipe. So let's get started.
And I once went to my grandfather's birthplace was in Cluj-Napoca, which is Transylvania. So going back there and seeing the food and seeing some of the synagogues that are still around was really inspiring and exciting.
Very, very cool. I just want to tell everyone that Chef Tony is the little cousin of Rabbi Adam Jacobs, our director of original programming. And now that we're seeing our connection, we might be cousins too, Chef Tony.
I wouldn't doubt that we are. And I would also say too that this recipe is from my Nana's side, but my grandmother's side has zillions of recipes, and I'm working on them constantly. And if anything, that's really one of the special things is taking all those recipes that we grew up with and making sure that they carry on.
I love it. I definitely feel that's a responsibility. So let's show everyone how this gets started and how we're going to carry on this tradition.
Sure. So it's a really simple recipe. I'd like to say I actually knew this, but I didn't. But Mandel bread is just Yiddish for mandel, the almonds, and then the bread. Yeah. It's what's really neat about it. It's kind of a takeoff of those twice-baked cookies that are part of so many different traditions. So we think of biscotti, we think of bizcocho in Spain, and then we think of biscuits in France. And so similar concept. As I said, it's mandel bread. So I've got my almonds. I toasted these for about 8 minutes, and they're kind of really good and fragrant. I'm going to add them to the food processor.
8 minutes, and what temperature, Chef Tony?
It can actually be 8 or 10 minutes. It's 375, which is the same temperature that we work with for the actual biscotti.
Great.
For the mandel bread. And in terms of, this obviously times are good as guidelines, but what you'll notice is when you're going to bake those almonds, they'll get nice and fragrant, and that's kind of when they're there. All those oils are getting activated and toasted. So I'm gonna make a little bit of noise, and I'm just gonna pulse coarsely chop. And I'll give you a look. I'll give you a quick look at what I did here.
And I love that you did that right there in the food processor. Excellent. So we'll go to the side camera. We'll take a look at the coarseness.
You can see right there.
Oh, beautiful.
So they're kind of coarse. And I also, they're skin on too, so that you can kind of see that it's really a nice rustic preparation. So I'm going to set those to the side. And then I'm going to get going with the rest of the recipe. So it's going to be 3 eggs. The eggs.
Chef Tony, your family's coming out. Rabbi Adam said, he commented live that you're the best chef ever.
There was a transfer of goods probably before he said that. How's that?
That's
I'm
cool.
going to use
Whatever
three
works.
eggs. I'm going to use 3 eggs, and eggs are something that don't often end up in biscotti. And so that's one of the distinguishing characteristics of Mandel bread. These eggs are going to give the crumb a little bit more tenderness and richness.
So we described it like the difference maybe in taste from biscotti to Mandel bread is that the Mandel bread is not quite as crisp.
That's fair. It's
Right.
definitely a little bit more, like I said, tender, a little bit more crumbly. I like that. I think a lot of it's kind of personal preference.
Correct. I like that too. Your aunt also popped on here. So, our number one, you should know, viewers, even though sometimes episodes we could get hundreds of thousands of views, my mom and Rabbi Adam's mom do not miss an episode. So they're coming out of the woodwork for you.
And Adam's mom, my Aunt Arlene, is an extraordinary chef who's worked in some of the best places around. So great artistic talent goes all ways. So I'm going to just add these eggs. Those are 3 eggs right there. I'm going to add them to my stand mixer. Along with that, I'm going to first give them a quick beat. While that's going for a minute, any other questions, Jamie, about what I'm prepping over here?
Everything that you're doing is great. Or someone was just asking how many nuts. I mean, everyone should know. You don't worry whatsoever. We will link the recipe, but if you happen to know the measurements off the top of your head, please share.
It was 15 ounces of almonds.
Oh,
and
great.
in some ways, then, I know folks are using almond flour. In this recipe, it almost acts as like a binder as well, which is kind of neat.
I love that.
Yeah, so it's kind of, obviously it's a flavoring agent, but it's also behaving like a binder the way we think of almond flour. So I've got a cup of sugar here, of granulated sugar. And I think
people are always concerned when you're going to add that now to the yolks. Like, what are we looking for? After you add when you're beating the sugar and the eggs together.
So we're going to be adding the eggs, and I'm going to be adding a cup of oil.
Okay. What kind of oil?
Any neutral flavored oil is fine. I like expeller pressed sunflower oil. Grapeseed oil is great. Anything that's kind of neutral flavored, I think, is going to be fine. I know in today's world, folks are really conscious about the kind of oil they're using, that it be non-GMO, that it be processed properly. I'm a proponent of expeller pressed sunflower oil, but I'll leave it to folks. As long as it's neutral. I think olive oil might be a little bit overly strong for this preparation.
Okay, so thanks for sharing that.
I've been beating for about a minute or two. You were asking what I'm going to look for. Unlike a cookie recipe where you might be creaming butter and mixing it with sugar, this is just kind of, the goal is to kind of make this uniform. So I'm going to give you a quick look.
Thank you for that. I'm obsessed with your side cam, by the way. This helps people so much.
I've got somebody helping me on my side that's just an absolute genius.
We can shout out Mateo. Thank you, Mateo.
So you can just see that all I did was make it kind of nice and uniform.
So I love that. So we're not like finicky here looking for pale or looking for any kind of.
No, this is not like a meringue where we're looking for a certain kind of peak. This recipe, I probably should have done a better job selling it right from the front. It's really easy.
Oh, yes.
So it really is forgiving. And so right now I have 12 and a half ounces of our stone milled flour. So this is what we do.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is your moment. So tell us all about this. This is really your passion, One Mighty Mill.
It's my life and it's my passion. We had this vision a couple of years ago. It started with my obsession with bagels and wanting to make bagels. And then along with my partner.
So you are Jewish, Chef Tony, just making sure.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would eat bagels. I think I was born with a bagel in my mouth. My mom will have to confirm, but when we really became obsessed with bagels, we thought, it's great to make a bagel, but if we're going to do it, we want to source wheat locally. We want to mill it fresh. And it makes all the difference in not only the flavor of our flour, but also the nutrition. So it's going to be a little hard to pick up in this camera, but if those folks ever, give our flour a try from our e-commerce platform, what you'll see is it's got all these specks of bran and germ. It's got a really intense nutty aroma. It's baking probably the way our great-great-grandmothers did when milling was something that people would do in their own town. So
it's like authentic to the recipe.
Exactly, right? All right, so this is 12 3/4 ounces of flour. I'm a big proponent of scaling your flour.
I was just going to ask how important when baking is scaling and weighing. Yeah.
It is. I mean, look, if you just go and take 3 cups, you most likely are going to get there. A kitchen scale costs approximately $15, and a digital, it just helps make recipes that much clearer, because flour does get packed down depending on how it's been transferred to your house. So anyways, I'm going to, actually, I almost skipped a step. I have a little bit of baking soda, so I got about a teaspoon of baking soda. And I've also got a little bit of salt that I'm going to add.
So we're doing all the dry ingredients in the bowl, and then we'll add them to the wet ingredients? Is that like important here?
Mix.
Okay,
and
good.
regarding the salt, I know, there's so many folks that are on low sodium diets. I totally respect that. The amount of salt in here is so minuscule, but it really will make an incredible difference in just giving the finished cookie just a slight, edge, and it'll bring out all those other flavors. So this would probably be
what kind of salt?
Pardon me?
Can you tell us what kind of salt?
I'm using fine kosher salt. So
yay!
Yeah. I mean, just nice and simple. And that makes all the difference for me. So I'm going to start processing, and I'm going to add these 3 cups of flour. And one note
on that side camera next to you, Tony. Do you want to just talk want to let that go and then talk about the mill there?
Of course. Yeah. So the mill, I'm actually just going to do, it actually moves so quickly that if you don't mind, I want to add these nuts real quick, and then I'll go back to the mill.
Great.
So
excellent.
I'm going to add those coarsely chopped nuts.
I love the texture it's going to give. I love that.
And it ends up giving it these really big, this really kind of nice, dense, coarse texture. Mateo over here, he's kind of like a biscotti guy, and I've turned him into a Mandel Bread person.
Oh, good. We're trying to convert everyone.
He was excited to participate in today because I think he knows most of the Mandel Bread is going to him after this episode. So, well,
he's a lucky guy, but he deserves it after the setup that he just did. So I'm so happy he's getting something.
So I want to show you this really quickly before just telling you a little bit.
I love seeing that, just sort of sticky and thick, and fantastic.
So, and to be clear, it's definitely a little bit looser than a traditional cookie dough. We're going to kind of form it, and I'll give you a look at that. So
now, our grandmothers probably did not have stand mixers. So how important, could this be whisked, the sugar and the egg, and then could this be sort of folded in the dry ingredients?
Hand beaters, like a hand mixer, would perfectly do the job. You most certainly can do it with a hand. Then again, my grandmother both grandmothers probably had better muscles than I do, so there was probably a reason for that, right?
They were much stronger, both physically, emotionally, everything in that generation, for sure.
God love, yes, no question. So you can see that this is the batter, and we're going to form that. Before I do, though, you were asking about the milling. You can kind of see it in the background over in this direction. And it was, there's not a lot of people stone milling, and there's a pretty good reason for that. It's really labor intensive. But, like all things, when you do things the way, they were done traditionally, there's been this moment where we realized that, hey, olive oil is really healthy. Who would have thought that? Except all the, generations of folks in the Mediterranean. Quinoa, people eat quinoa, and who would have thought that except the Incas from a couple thousand years ago. So stone milling, I think what we really became aware of, when you take a mill like this one over here on my left, and you stone mill organic wheat, and you do it fresh, there's a couple of things that happen. The first thing is that all those wonderful oils, those good fats, and we obviously these days know about good fats. We know about good fats in avocados and in fish. Wheat has its own good oils, and those oils are like all fat. They're great flavor. Also, too, they're packed with nutrition. The one thing you might ask me is, well, why did stone milling disappear, and why are those fats so important? Well, the one certainty about those fats that are so essential to wheat berry is that they're also prone to rancidity. So our flour has a shelf life
of like forever.
well, no, but you know what? It's actually not that long because fat is prone to rancidity, and so I think of our flour the way I think of a coffee, where you go and you grind it fresh, and all those oils and flavors get activated. Simultaneously, the nutrition does too. The end result is you've got this flour that's kind of alive, and it really makes your baked goods special, different. So the Mandel bread we're making right now, I think, are going to be extra nutty.
So I know you were saying our flour, I thought you were referencing the flour we've been accustomed to, which is like, it has like, shelf stable forever, but your flour, which really is almost a superfood, is a lot more alive.
No question. And I think it's a weird thing because I think when people have gotten used to our stone milled flour, and by the way, I think, kind of similar to what happened with coffee, I think you're going to see a lot more folks stone milling fresh. I think that's
cool. So I love that you started the trend.
Well, listen, it was about time for me. I've been waiting. But I think it's going to be kind of part of what happens. One thing is folks always are like, they get a little nervous about a flour having a shelf life. For me, the flip side is kind of scary when you have that kind of industrial flour that you can put in your cupboard and not get back to 2 or 3 years. If microbes and bacteria in the air aren't interested in consuming it, then your stomach most likely going to have a hard time. And so I think that's a big part of why so many folks are saying, I'm gluten intolerant. I don't think, our great-great-grandparents weren't necessarily gluten intolerant. They were just getting flour as it was meant to, whole grain and fresh milled. And so that's kind of our, what we wanted to do is in bringing back stone milling.
Very cool. Okay, so now what are we doing with this batter?
So we're going to do 2 things. I have a big sheet tray, and I'm going to put on some gloves. If you don't have gloves at home, you can certainly use wet hands, and I think that'll be perfectly fine.
Okay, great.
But I think gloves for me are kind of easy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this Mandel bread batter, and I'm going to form it into some logs.
Great. And I love how you're doing it on the baking sheet so people just know we want, these to be freeform versus we don't want these in a loaf pan.
Yeah, and I always loathe might be a strong word, but I always think that when people are doing demos, they always talk about, this smell and that smell. I can tell you though right now, the smell of the almonds and the flour, it's really, really intense. So I think we're nearing. Which is
going to bring fabulous flavor to that. I love that.
No question. So in the recipe that I shared, you can make 2 logs that are approximately 3 inches.
Right.
I'm going to just do 1 log because I'm in One Mighty Mill's test kitchen space. So all we have are these big mama.
Right, you got this like industrial sized pan over there. But yes, the recipe definitely says 2 logs.
It's the best. I can make a big mess and then people help me clean up. It is my favorite. It's my happy place. And then I go home and I realize I have to do my own dishes. So
I know, so annoying.
So nothing really special in terms of how I'm doing it. I'm just using my hands to kind of crimp. I think the more uniform that you make this, the better it will kind of better it'll bake because it'll bake more uniformly. So
great. Can you just on the side cam pick it? I love this view. And then on the side cam, if you want to just pick it up a little closer, like the pan, I love that. Fabulous. Stunning.
So nothing too complicated. And what I've done, any questions on that forming? Because I was going to show you, I've kind of made this is the before, and I've got an after that I was going to slice up, if that's okay with you.
That's fantastic. But let's tell people, please, how long this goes in the oven, how you bake it before we get to the slicing.
Great question. So the oven should be set at 375. That was the same temperature I used to toast the almonds.
Right.
This is going to go in the oven, and it's going to cook for approximately 30 to 40 minutes. To be honest, one thing I've found from developing recipes is that people's ovens do vary at home, and that's fine.
Oh, totally.
I think what we're looking for, and what's beautiful about this, it's a low temperature, so you can kind of coast along there. This isn't like, an expensive roast that if it goes 5 minutes too long, all things are ruined.
Killed it, correct.
If it goes a little bit long, and you'll see actually from my test, I think I took mine a little long, it's not the end of the world. Because as I said, like a biscotti, this is going to be twice baked. So you kind of get some margin for error. So we're going to start
So
at
what are we
370.
looking for after that first bake? Just
I'll
like an
show you.
indicator. Yeah,
I'll
visual.
show
Oh,
you.
I love it. Thank you.
Bread knife. So
There was a question that did pop up before. Could people use almond flour instead of and whole ground almonds? People are asking.
I think
Louise is asking.
no question. That would work perfectly fine. I think this is a preparation that is really forgiving. So I think you would. I think the only trick with the almond flour, as with flour, there's variability with the kind of almond flour you get, the coarseness and whatnot. So you might have to tinker. You could see that what I had was kind of this like pasty texture.
Yes.
That's what you're going to want to look for, so that on that twice bake, it kind of holds up.
And then Chef Tony, I see a whole display of bags behind you. What variations of flour do you guys offer?
There's two primary that we have. We have an all-purpose flour.
Okay.
Tell me how I'm doing on the camera.
Let's see.
Can everyone see that? Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
So our all-purpose flour is what I use for this recipe.
Okay.
For those folks that don't know, all-purpose flour and bread flour are both categorized by protein content.
Okay.
So when you see something that says all-purpose flour, it generally means it's approximately 11% protein.
Okay.
And what that means, it's going to be great for cookies. It's going to be great for cakes. It's going to be great for things that you want to be kind of tender. You don't want any of that gluten structure to build up. You want it to be, kind of fork tender and, as it were, in a cake.
Great.
The bread flour is going to be a better fit with pizzas, pastas.
Challah.
Yeah, challah, 100%. We actually just made some shmura flour for Passover, and we used our bread flour. So that,
wow.
Yeah, we're all over the place. One of the really exciting things about One Mighty Mill is that there's so many different food traditions from around the globe that rely on wheat. And so certainly bagels was my first passion, but as time goes by, the opportunity to apply our flour into all these incredible traditional recipes is super exciting.
I think that's lovely to be, exotic and to go global with the flour. Someone was asking before if we could use almond essence. I'm guessing she means almond extract. So any benefits to adding any kind of extract to the dough or is it not needed when you toast the almonds?
May I be honest?
Please, Chef.
Almond extract is always one of those things. I think it's like, cilantro. It's one of those things you love it or you don't like it. And so I would be remiss if I didn't say, I always find that almond extract has things tasting like marzipan or overly strong.
I don't like marzipan.
I think that person that probably asked that question loves almond extract.
Yes.
So I'm not going to rain on their parade. I would say, have at it. I bet you'll like it even better.
Okay. And I happen to love cilantro. Where do you stand on that debate?
I'm a big cilantro guy. So
I've
like cilantro, not so much almond extract.
But no cilantro on the Mandel bread, though.
So what I was going to do, and let's see how, I baked this off earlier.
Great.
And so I did so for about 30 minutes. I actually made it a little bit wider. I wanted to just kind of play around. To be clear, so you can see this is more like 4 inches rather than the 3 inches.
Okay.
Can you see that okay?
Perfect. Beautiful.
Great.
You can even move this white bowl out of the way, if you want to.
All right, as long as I don't have to touch my tea.
You drink. I already started drinking. I told you I'm on the road today, so I don't have a special drink. So I'm in a hotel room, and I've got mineral water. And what kind of tea do you have, Chef Tony?
It's Earl Grey.
Cool.
I know what I do is I start with coffee and then just keep on adding on whatever I can find. So, so what I was going to do right now, similar concept if you've ever made biscotti or maybe you've made mandel bread. I'm just going to work on the diagonal because what I want is for these slices to be slightly longer.
I love that. Yes, they're very long, beautiful.
And to be clear, I made these about a half hour ago. So they've been cooling, and you do want to let them cool at room temp.
Okay.
It makes them easier to slice. I'm not necessarily worried. It's not just a question of not wanting to burn your fingers. It's also that the mandel bread will set up and it'll make it a lot easier to cut.
Yeah, and you'll get nice slices.
So yeah, I'm just going to cut about 3/4 of an inch.
And you're using a long serrated knife?
I am. That's exactly what
Great,
I'm using right
great,
here. And they're
perfect.
slicing pretty easy. I'm going to put them, I'm going to add them to a baking sheet with a piece of parchment paper. If
Right.
folks don't have parchment paper at home, it's a good investment. It's kind of nonstick. It holds up well to heat, and
Yeah.
it ensures that things kind of cook evenly. So that's one of those
Great.
things that I think it's more readily available in supermarkets. Once upon a time, you had to work to find it. But if you
Right.
don't have parchment paper, I would highly encourage that you go pick some up.
And I
So
love all of the tips that you gave and the reasons for why to have parchment paper. One of the number ones that you didn't even mention is a little bit easier cleanup, but certainly for even baking too.
yeah, and in greasing, I'm never a big fan of greasing.
Uh,
When possible, I prefer to avoid greasing because the grease sheet pan can kind of burn in the oven and develops off
right.
flavors, etc. So I'm
Sure.
going to keep going. Any questions while I'm at work here?
No, everything, is great regarding the recipe. I think if anyone has any questions, I'll ask our producer, Adam Bradley, to just go ahead and throw them up on the screen regarding the recipe. But I did want to get into, this show is called Feed Your Soul. So not only do we want to give great recipes that can feed people and comfort them as we discuss, but we talk a little bit about the soulful side of, cooking and baking. And I see that you have such a passion. So I kind of wanted to know, where does that come from? And do you see anything? It can't be just, that you're doing this from a physical need, but it seems you have spiritual connection to food, to flour, to baking, to cooking. Talk to me a little bit about that.
I mean, it's one of the most. It's what drew me to food, and I don't know if everyone had an experience like that, but I had two grandmothers that were both in Montreal, and the high point of of my childhood was the high holidays and going to visit both grandmothers, and when I say going to visit both grandmothers, I mean just being overfed on all the most wonderful different things. And so for me, those traditions, I mean, obviously as a young boy, I was aware of all the different holidays, but I really associate those holidays from a base level with what we were going to eat.
Right.
And I was lucky enough to have the kinds of Jewish grandmothers that did not feel okay until they really had known that you'd eaten seconds and thirds. That was, they said, I love you, of course, plenty, but they really, the way they really said, I love you, was how they baked. And so for me, these many years later, I realized that not only do I long for these items that that I grew up with, but there's obviously kind of a peacefulness that comes about you when you go and engage these kinds of recipes. And so
Yeah.
to me, it is so essential that all those food traditions that we grew up with and that were passed along to us, that we're passing those on to others.
I love so many things that you said, and I relate to so much of it. But something that was so poignant to me is that you said the food is the way that they say I love you. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and even though, of course, they could say it, in general, they didn't speak much. They went through a lot in their lives, and I feel like the food was the way that they showed and said I love you, and the way that they hugged us more. They were less touchy feely. They were less verbal, not just a language barrier, but again, because of what they went through. And to me, that resonates so much. And even though, of course, everyone knows me, I'm a huge hugger and I'm so overflowing with love. And I talk to my kids all the time about how much I love them and adore them. Something about feeding them, it's just like so base. It's like the most heart to heart, soul to soul experience, I feel.
Well, I remember my grandmother, so my father's grandmother and Adam's grandmother as well, being able to tell us that when she was growing up in Lithuania, that before she left the house in the winter, her mom would make her take a pat of butter in her mouth just to make sure that there was plenty of meat on the bones. And I still relate to that, though, in a similar way. Fortunate nobody was putting butter in my mouth, in the 80s, but I do think that obviously a sign of our health was us eating well, and
Yeah.
so of all the different things I think that could get passed along, I think food and those food traditions, and I think as a kid and hopefully as an adult and for those next generations, when you are well fed with good ingredients, stone milled flour and all these fine ingredients, I think it does make us, a difference. And obviously over the last many months of this pandemic, people have found their love of baking. And I'm a person that believes in silver lining. So if the one thing that happened was that folks spent more time around the dinner table with family, and if folks, whether it's an obsession with sourdough, or maybe we go to 2.0, and maybe there's things like Mandel bread that are part of our next baking traditions. For me, I think that just makes that's a good thing. If in a bad time, some good things came of it.
Absolutely. Amen to that. I want to ask you one more question, but first I want to see what you do with these after you've sliced them. So we're going to lay them probably, on a baking sheet.
I'm going to put them on this baking sheet. And I actually wasn't organized enough to get a piece of parchment, but what I'm going to do is just lay them out here. And I would just kind of line them up as such. And just evenly space them. And what I'm going to do, I dropped the oven down to 300. I'm going to bake them for another 30 minutes or so. And the goal with this is to really dry out the biscotti. Excuse me. I keep doing that because we make biscotti. I have a big batch of biscotti going while I'm making the Mandel bread in our test facility.
Well, don't give Matteo the biscotti. He only gets the Mandel bread.
Matteo already eats most of the biscotti. So we're going to have to, but so I'm just going to line them up, and I'm going to bake them for 30 minutes. And when they're done, what you'll see, I made a batch up early this morning.
I just want to note, Chef Tony, that people should not overcrowd that pan because we want them to crisp up. So make sure like the way you place them with a little bit of room around it.
100%. And a lot of times when you're making like a regular set of cookies, obviously the really big concern is that you don't overbake and that they're just slightly dark around the edges. These are going to get to kind of a really nice light golden brown uniformly. So what we're really doing with this double bake is pulling out a lot of the moisture. And like all those other preparations I talked about, I think the beauty of these, whether it's biscotti, bizcocho, biscuits, it's that they can hold, for 2 to 3 weeks. And part of that reason is because they've been really well baked and so they're kind of, shelf stable. It's a great.
So how would you store them for those 2 to 3 weeks?
An airtight container. If you were my grandmother, you would save some of those old, pretzel. I don't know if you remember the sugar cookies that would come in a pretzel. I think she would buy those solely for the tins. So I have some of those tins, literally 30-year-old tins. So I like to put it with some wax paper and layered in a tin. And maybe put an extra side stash so nobody's counting how many I'm actually eating over the course of days. That's the move. But if you can see kind of what they look like right now. I'll go closer to our side camera, but you can kind of see that they've got these great color, and you can see the almonds on the cross section.
The browning on them, please. Yeah, and Debbie was asking, you don't need to flip them when they're directly in the pan. You just break them out. You don't have to flip them a second time, correct? On the second bake,
you don't need to. I think that one time bake will most certainly brown both sides. The only other thing I would suggest, it's part of the directions. Make sure you put it in the center part of your oven so that you're getting really good uniform baking. This is not one of these deals where you have to go flipping or things around all over the place. But getting it in the center is going to mean that you're going to have nice even heat.
Beautiful. Now, Avi was asking before about adding chocolate chips to the batter. Could you add chocolate chips? Could you add dried fruit? Like, what are your thoughts on any ideas for add-ins?
Well, I think our standard ask as a young person was chocolate chip cookies. And for me, as a young kid, ends up being a real cookie. And so that was always a source of negotiations with my mother in my house. But to answer your question, dried fruit will do great. Chocolate chip cookies will do great. You could even dip these after baking.
I love that.
Yeah.
And only dipping like half of them into like a white chocolate or a dark chocolate.
Yeah, well, so they're great for gift giving, and they're, and that's one of those nice things about a cookie that really has shelf stability. You can put it in a nice cellophane bag, tie it up, put your name on it, and pass it around to friends and family. And I think that's just such a nice touch
It is
So
such a nice touch. And I love the way that you told everyone, if you guys are just tuning in now, Chef Tony showed us how to cut them on the diagonal so they'll be longer. It's such an elegant gift when they're nice and long and dipped in chocolate. And Gustavo was mentioning that he enjoys them with St. Dalfor spread, like a jam or fruit spread on top, that's so much fun. I've never done that with my Mandel bread.
well, it's one of those things, and that kind of goes to the preparation itself, which as you know, no kidding, there was a batch every single week in our house, and it's one of those
Wow.
things that if you do establish a little bit of a rhythm with baking, it is one of those things that it always has a use. And so no matter how harried your week is and how many times you have to phone out for delivery or whatever, the fact that you have this, I think, it makes a difference in just making sure that you're getting something good and healthy, whether it's part of a lunchbox or after dinner as a dessert.
Excellent. My last question for you, Chef Tony. You mentioned before when we were talking about there being a peacefulness to baking. Just elaborate a little on that for me. What it means, how that happened for you, how you came to find that sense of peace
Well,
during cooking and baking.
In some ways, I'm a career changer because my whole career has been based in savory cooking, and my partner and I had a lot of different restaurants, and I love that. And I think I'm a natural on the savory side. But when you go to bake, and so it's something that I've done a lot more over the last many years, and now it's kind of my full time. You do realize that you interact with ingredients. And so a recipe like this, most certainly, it has, obviously it has clear measurements. But one of the beauties is as you're making this and you're kneading and you're forming and all that, I do think that there's something really elemental about it. And so I don't do yoga, although I probably would like to.
Me too. It's on my list. I want to do it too.
Well, but so what I tell myself is short of doing, meditation or yoga, what I most certainly do is I do a lot of baking, and there's quiet moments when you're working on this. And I think there's something about it that most certainly takes you to kind of a happy, peaceful place. So I don't know if it'll solve everybody's stresses, but I would suggest that if you try this recipe, I think you'll find for just a moment, you'll kind of feel nice and relaxed.
I love that. That's a perfect way to end Feed Your Soul. That's exactly what we love talking about. Chef Tony, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing a piece of your heart, your soul, your history, your family with us. And I can't wait to have you back. I want to learn more about the flour, and I feel like we could cook something else from your mom or grandma or something that you've even developed on your own. I'd love to have you again on the show.
I covered a recipe from my Nana. I think it's time to do something for my grandmother. I want them both happy up in where they are.
It's so funny. My grandfather's, it's not funny, but just I feel like you echo so much of what I want to say, and I connect with you so much. My grandfather's passed away 6 weeks apart. So when I had my son, I was close to both of them, and I didn't want my mother to be upset or my father to be upset. So I named him after both. So he's represented. So now we've got to do the same for you. We got to get you back on with the recipe from your grandma.
Listen, I already got my Jewish guilt going full. So everything I can do to even it out means it's how I get to bed at night. So that's the truth.
Amazing, amazing. So thank you so much. And I can't wait to try the recipe. The recipe is linked below. And also One Mighty Meal sounds amazing, the flowers. And I can't wait to learn more. So thank you so much, Chef Tony.
Have a great day. Thank you.
You too. Wow, that was such a beautiful episode, and I feel like it's exactly what we need now. And hi there, Mirella from Lima. Always, guys, tell me where you're watching from. I said that this recipe is dedicated to the 45 angels that perished in the tragedy and on Mount Meron. Talia, hi, how are you? And I feel like this episode was one step toward healing. Mati said, you're in New York. You just came back from Israel. We already miss you here, Mati. Hey there, Talia in Hawaii. Unbelievable the way that we come together. Food is something that really, really brings us all together. And you must, if you're just tuning in now, watch back what Chef Tony said. We spoke about so many things and soulful things. And one of the things he spoke about is a sense of peace when he's baking. And it's not just that the food could be comfort food, right? And then we can just literally feed our soul, but also the actual act of cooking and baking is therapeutic. So what a year. I always say, what a day this last year has been, and what a week we've had here in Israel and across the Jewish nation, and how our heart is broken. So I hope that this sort of recipe from the old country, mandel bread, it brings you some comfort, both either consuming it or even baking it, layers and layers and layers of peace and comfort, God willing. Please always let us know what you'd like to see on the show, who you'd like us to bring on. Hey there, Margot in South Africa, which recipes you'd like us to make. We've got a slew of amazing guests coming up over the course of the next few weeks. So please always tune in Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern. This is Feed Your Soul, brought to you by Aish. Mommy, I love you. And Mommy, you know where I am. That's why I'm going to call you back. It was my Hebrew birthday yesterday. So we came to a hotel in Jerusalem for a few days. Just a little getaway, and the kids will be joining us for Shabbos. So, Mom, that's why I haven't been in touch. But I figure you're spying now, so you're seeing what's going on, or you know the setting, and you know what's up. Love you, Mommy. Love to everyone. Everyone have a wonderful, wonderful week. See you next week.